Hey everyone, when I built my Homelab NAS a few months ago, it was more of a budget build, and so I got a really budget case which didn't have dust filters or anything like that. But I thought that wouldn't matter because I actually stored it on a table raised from the ground, so I thought no dust would get into it. But when I opened it a few months ago, quite a lot of dust was actually getting into it, especially via this sort of side intake fan. So I did what any good introvert would do, and I overanalyzed the situation quite a lot, and then I went out and bought loads of different dust filters. And in this video, I'm going to add these dust filters onto my Homelab NAS and also my workstation computer, which is another budget build, which also doesn't come with any dust filters or anything like that. There are, though, some do's and don'ts when it comes to dust filters, because these are not some magic panacea that's magically going to mean that you never need to clean your computer ever again. So when it actually comes to side fans and things like that, they can take in a lot of dust, and the traditional way you would do things is you go out and you buy a thin mesh filter like this, and then you would put this on. And then what you would actually do is you'd screw back over into there. So you would take the screws out, you take all four out, but in this case I'm doing just this one to show you. You would put the dust filter over it, and then you would screw back over it. So as you can see there, so you'd screw all four. What would actually happen is your dust filter would then be covering the actual outside of the 120mm fan. So when cool air is coming in, if there's any dust or cat hair or dog hair or anything like that, the dust filter is actually going to stop the dust and cat hair and stuff, which is great, it'll stop all of that. But there is a problem. Firstly, you will actually need to clean these, as I mentioned. If you literally didn't do that, what would happen is this filter would get really dusty, and then that's going to limit your airflow. I mean, it's already going to limit your airflow a little bit because this is a fine mesh, and obviously it's a lot finer than what was there before. And as a result, you are going to have limited airflow, so you do need to know that. And obviously before this video, I did take some stats in HW Info and my fan software and things like that. So I'll compare the results at the end. But the other big downside of dust filters in this particular configuration is obviously I've actually screwed them in to my fans. So what actually happens is every time I want to clean this particular dust filter, I'm actually going to need to take off all four screws, and then the fan's going to drop. Then I can clean the dust filter, and then obviously finally I can come back and put the fan back on and put the dust filter back on and everything else and screw it back in, which is quite annoying. So there is actually an alternative, and that's why I only did one of these four screws. But what you can do instead is actually buy a magnetic filter instead. So it's still got screw holes on there, and you can screw in if you wanted. For example, if your case was acrylic or something else, you can still do the screw hole method. But obviously if you've got metal case, this actually has magnets built in, and you simply pop it over your fans like that, and it's now done, and it'll actually stay on there. So if I just, okay, it slid off because I put it the wrong way around. It's only magnetic on one side, of course, that's how magnets work. Whoops. But anyway, you can check the actual which side is magnetic. So in this case, it's this. So basically, you put it on there, it covers all of the holes, or pretty much covers all the holes, and you've got a much finer mesh as well. I actually much prefer this dust filter to this one. I just don't think that's a very good one, to be honest. But basically, this is the better way of doing it, especially with a side fan or something like that, where you don't want to have to screw and unscrew it all the time. You can just simply use this and it will just work. And then when you want to come to clean it, you take it off, clean it, and then once it's dried, you never put it back on while it's still wet, of course, because otherwise moisture could go into the computer. Once it's actually dried, you just put it back, and these are the best. I mean, if you're gonna go out and buy dust filters, this was 99p, this other one was £2 or £3, I think. So it is a bit more money, but it's also a lot more convenient. I mean, this is a false economy because you'll spend so much time actually rebuilding half your computer. It'll feel like you literally need to be taking your fans off all the time. My computer does also have an exhaust fan, which we can see there. So it's got this exhaust fan as well. I'm not going to cover that though, because that brings me to my next point. I know I mentioned it in the intro, but basically with exhaust fans, you don't tend to want to block them up. I mean, I do have another dust filter, so what I could literally do is come along and put that on there. Wrong way, again, I keep doing that. But you could put it on there and it would cover the dust as well. But as I said, you shouldn't really do that. Exhaust fans are all about getting rid of the hot air inside your computer, so you really don't want to cover them because it will limit your airflow. But I wanted to talk about the exception to the rule, because there's always one. In my workstation computer, I've actually got top exhaust fans, but I will be putting a fan cover on that. So this is the Kit Galaxy case, and on top you've got space for two fans, 120mm fans on the inside or 140mm fans on the outside. But the problem is I don't actually run this computer 24/7. Some days on the weekend it's off for the entire day. Other times during the week it is on, obviously, but then I put it off once I'm done with my work or whatever, and then it's off overnight as well. So any dust can actually fall down into the case. So you could argue I should come along and get 120mm magnetic fan filters or whatever because I got 120mm fans. and pop them on there when my computer is not running. So obviously that would be 120mm ones, but of course you've still got this gap along the edge because obviously this case supports 140mm fans as well. So what you'd probably want to do, and it might seem obvious but I wanted to cover it, but instead of 120mm dust filters, you want 140mm ones instead. If you've actually got, you know, that option, you want to fill as much of the space as possible so that you're minimizing the chance of dust getting in. And already I can see some dust on these. But you could do something like that, and I could leave them on all the time, but obviously because they're exhaust fans, as I said, it's not really ideal to do that when the computer's running. Because they're magnetic, it's easy to just take them off either when my computer's running, or take them off when I actually want to clean them and everything else. So that is individual ones, but what you can actually do, if you know you've got 2 fans, for example, you can actually buy a double slot dust filter. And again, it's got a fine mesh, certainly finer than what's actually on my computer. It's got much smaller holes than that. Then you can just simply pop it down, one thing, and jobs are good done. And actually, that is quite an easy solution. And what I'm going to be doing is leaving this on there overnight and on weekends when I'm not using my computer and things like that. And then, you know, when I am using it, I could just simply stick it in a drawer or something like that. And that's actually quite a good solution, I feel, because then you kind of got the best of both worlds. So this is the front of the case, but what's important to know here is it's actually got, despite the way that this case actually looks, this is completely solid. The only place that air can actually get in is via these particular fan grills. You can see there, if I just turn that round a little bit, you can actually see there. So there's 2 things you could do. You could potentially, in some cases, if this was a single strip, you could actually come along and buy a strip of magnetic dust filter or something like that. However, in some cases, such as with this one, it's actually quite hard to actually get dust filters that fit because you've got these bits of plastic that jet out, you've got another bit of plastic that jets out for the RGB strip. What you can do instead is look at actually patching the holes on your case instead. So in this case, I've got 3 intake fans here, and I've got this little strip here. So I could put a dust filter there, covering that one, and another dust filter there, covering that one, and another dust filter covering there when I actually learn the order of things. There we are, that's the way around. And that again is going to help a lot more than simply not having those dust filters. And again, I can't really cover that strip, so this is going to be the easiest way. And I'll talk about this in a minute, don't worry, this particular panel, because that's just like some massive dust intake. The key thing to know though is once I've actually put this back on, out of sight, out of mind can kick in, and it's really easy to forget that you've actually got these dust filters here. So what I would actually do, it sounds silly, but put something in the calendar or something like that, and just remember you want to actually, you know, take the front of this off and actually check these dust filters and clean them as necessary. Then you've got this particular bit, and there's a few different options there. You can make your own dust filters, and actually Jay's 2 Cents done a really good video on this, which I'll link to down in the description. But the other option is I measured this up and I was able to find these magnetic dust filters that sort of work. I mean, they're better than nothing anyway. And basically, they just about fit a little bit. They don't cover the whole thing. It's not really ideal, and obviously I've got these cables coming in, so I need to be a bit careful. But obviously, you know, I could either have multiple ones like that. It looks a bit janky, but I can either have multiple ones like that, or I could just come along and have a single one like that. And then it's simply a case of putting the actual cover back on. Okay, so this now is the Aerocool case. This is my Homelab NAS to actually store all my media content and things like that. It's got 2 NVMe drives in there. You've got this gaping hole here where all the cables come through, and then another one there. This is different though, because the fans here, they're actually outward. So many cases, the fans actually are on the inside. Here, they're actually on the outside, because this is such a small case, it doesn't fit inside. So obviously in this particular case, things are going to be slightly different. Obviously the top holes are absolutely fine. You can just cover them up. Yeah, that's better than nothing. It doesn't look great, but it will actually work, and it'll prevent some dust getting in. But when it comes to these, as I mentioned, it's not magnetic, so that's not going to work. But obviously it's not too bad, because obviously you've got these screw holes completely free. So whichever type of dust filter you actually want to use, it's just going to be a case of putting it over it and then screwing it in. So these are now screwed in. I'm not particularly a fan of this cheaper bottom one, just because it doesn't feel as strong, and there's more gaps around it compared to this one where it's really solid and covers things a lot more. But obviously either way, this is going to prevent a lot more dust coming in than what I had before, where dust was just constantly being sucked in, and this was quite a dusty case. So has this led to any temperature changes? Well, before doing anything on my workstation computer, temperatures were higher than I thought actually, but fan RPMs were around 1,000, if we can see there. But if we look at the T-die averages that tend to move around less, it's 50 and 40. And then if we compare that to my workstation computer, again, you're looking around 50 and 40, no major difference there. I did actually see my case fan spinning more, so 1100 RPM, but I don't know whether that's the fact that this software recalibrates things every so often, but I will keep an eye on this in case my case fans are spinning more. If we then go back, just to confuse you, so before I had dust filters, I run Prime 95 on my main PC and temperatures were around 70 degrees. And then after the dust filters were applied, temperatures were again around 70 degrees, so no real change. And the same is true of my Homelab NAS, which runs on Debian and it's got an AMD stock cooler, but all the temperatures were fairly similar, as you can see here, no real change. So there you have it. Dust filters can be quite a good thing, in my opinion. Obviously, they're not ideal, they're not a panacea, as I've mentioned a few times in this video, because you will end up needing to take them off to clean them and things like that. It's certainly not going to mean that your computer's now suddenly maintenance free, but obviously I think they were a pretty good option, and I'm going to keep using them at least for 6 months, and then I'll probably do a video in 6 months and see whether I like them or not, or whether I've decided to take them all off because they're more hassle than they're worth. When that video's out, I'll put a link to it here, but I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please click the thumbs up button, and please subscribe to see more videos like this. Thanks for watching.